Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Lie to Me If You Dare. It's our exploration. My name is David. I'm with NLP Power. Most of you already know who I am, but for our viewers at home who might one day, see this, probably not. I've been involved in the study of human behavior, personality change, and all kinds of related disciplines for over half my life. I began the study. I should probably understand, why are we talking, if I'm an NLP teacher, why are we talking about lie detection? Mostly because we spend most of our time lying to ourselves. For those of you who are how many people are actually doing kind of therapy work? I know Dr. Nikki does.
Doing or getting?
One usually winds up being the other. But the truth of the matter is, in the hypnosis field especially, we have this thing called the presenting problem. And the presenting problem is the reason that the client shows up at your office, which is almost never the real reason they're there. You see, more often than not, the reason people think they're messed up isn't the real reason. But they need something to tell you so that they have a place to begin. Growing up, hi Jen. Growing up, I was blessed with what we know in the health professions as a very sensitive nervous system. For those of you who are more metaphysical, it means I had empathy that was on overdrive. Combine that with the fact that I was a very naive, trusting young child. I spent a lot of time feeling pain that wasn't mine and getting blamed for stuff that wasn't my fault. And I was desperate, because I had very poor social skills at the time, I was desperate for people to like me and want to spend time with me, which made me ripe for all kinds of deceptions and lies, and you name it, I was the target of it. So I developed a very mild form of post-traumatic stress called hypervigilance syndrome, which has different degrees to it. But hypervigilance syndrome, in its most fearsome form, is people who just can't shut off the awareness, the sensory acuity. Their senses are still as on an active hyper alert as they were back in the field in not Vietnam or whatever war they're fighting in. Well, being the sensitive lad that I was, I became really, really focused on trying to figure out who were the enemies, who were the bad guys, who was lying to me, who was trying to abuse me, those kinds of things. So my early traumatic childhood gave way to a tremendous skill in the ability to perceive things that most people don't pay attention to, and to discern truth from deception. Now, that being said, I have to tell you that this particular field that you're going to go into is not for the faint of heart. Okay, and the reason for that is because you can make a lot of mistakes. Also, if you want to be really good at catching lies, you got to be really, really willing to confront. And if you're not willing to confront somebody, a lot of the tools and tactics that professional lie detectors use are not going to be available to you. That being said, there's a lot of things that you can learn and that you can begin to incorporate into your daily ritual or things to pay attention to that will send up little red flags where somebody may or may not be lying to you. And keep in mind that as much as we like to think that all lies are bad, our society couldn't function without them. It's really true. But the bottom line is, not only did my early traumatic childhood lead me on this path, but my fascination with human behavior and human potential specifically kind of spurred me on and led me to two basic parallel career paths: influence and persuasion, as well as law enforcement. I was actually trained in kinesic interview and interrogation. I was going to be a criminal justice major, and then I looked at the stress level and the mortality rates of the average police officer and decided I probably would be better served in a different line of work. But I was fully trained to the degree I was at in kinesic interview and interrogation, and it was one of the most fascinating fields that I've ever encountered. There is no place where the skills that you learn tonight, or are at least exposed to tonight, will not help you. The more attention you can pay to another human being, cross-contextually, the more information that they will give you, and the more leverage and the more options you're given. In my systemic class, I tell people that the more range of motion that you have, the more your ability to move in any angle or from any position, the safer you become. The same is true here when we talk about the ability to perceive and become aware of human behaviors. Okay? To that effect, let's talk about a little bit about, I know most of you from past meetups, but I just want to kind of go around real quick and kind of figure out how to target what we're going to do tonight to a specific topic or set of topics that are relevant to you, something you can take home and start using right away. So let's start with Super Lily back here hiding in the back. What do you want to take home from our lie detection exploration tonight?
Well, obviously I want to know when people are lying to me.
How do you know I'm not lying to you now?
Why are you taking the class yet?
See? That's called a lie of omission. Go ahead.
So, I mean, sometimes I feel powerless when I'm around people who are manipulating me by lying to me.
Okay, so you
I sort of feel like they're lying, but if I knew, then I have a little more leverage.
Yeah. Let me ask you, just not to get off point, because I want to get through this as quick as possible because we have quite a few things that I want to cover. Remember that being aware of a lie is power, but it's what you do about it. If you know you're being lied to and you do nothing, you might as well not know. Right? But forewarned is forearmed. So yes, having more power in any kind of interaction with a human being, trust me, this is power. Terma, what about you?
I'm pretty much the same. I want to understand the difference between people that are lying just to do the right thing or manipulating. So,
okay. So good lies versus
the intention behind
versus
it.
bad lies. Okay. Okay, great. Very, very good though. It's important to understand that. Because trust me, especially if you're in relationships, calling your significant other on their little white lies, not good. Not good.
I would like to know, like, what kind of lies, like, should we act on every lie that's being told to us, or is it better to let some small ones go?
Cool. Oh.
I hadn't really thought about it. Didn't really know what I was going to encounter here, so I just thought I'd show up and take it in and see what I can do with it.
Right on. Jim.
You mentioned red flags, so you have your spidey senses. You feel you have some intuition, you have that gut feeling, right? I want to know the body language. What am I looking at to see the red flags?
Cool. Looking to increase my sensory acuity, be able to detect them.
That right there is the single biggest indicator of success in just about any field of endeavor. Being aware of what's going on and being able to calibrate what it means. Okay.
Me and Josh. I just wanted, you mentioned, being able to call somebody out on it when you do detect it. And I'm interested in kind of tactful ways to call people out, in heated environments, or, just kind of know when to, when's a good time that you should probably drop this and come back to it at a different time, or when is it a time to move forward and say, hey, you know what, this is BS. Just kind of the dealing with it.
All right. Very good.
Well, I had a recent client that I wasn't able to make progress with, and my perception was that she was not lying to herself or to me about what she wanted, and so I think if I had a little bit more, I could have maybe moved her along a little bit better.
Remember something, sometimes clients don't really want to know.
Yeah.
They really don't, and we're going to talk about that, especially some of the examples that I'll be giving. See, the easiest way to lie is when you have someone who actually wants to believe your lie, who has a vested interest in not investigating further. And we are all guilty of this at one time or another. Okay? We want to believe them because the pain of having to confront them and go deeper and find out we were lied to is just, it's too much. We run away from it. So, what's your name?
Matthew.
Matthew, welcome.
Hi.
What do you want to take home today?
Well, I'm actually just kind of curious about the theories and the techniques behind it.
And this young lady who didn't think I saw her sneak in.
Hi.
Hey,
I just same ditto.
yeah, just curious. Okay. Good. So now we know. Okay, well, let's talk about this.
Did we get him?
Oh no, I'm sorry, I missed
Yeah.
you. You were hiding in plain sight. You went stealth on me.
I would like to improve my interpersonal skills.
I'll tell you what. It's ironic, but being good at lie detection will force you to improve your interpersonal skills because of the lie detection. It'll actually make you actually more people. By the way, don't tell people you know this stuff. Never tell people you know this. Okay, because it's just like telling somebody you teach persuasion and covert hypnosis for a living. The minute you say that, the walls go up, and immediately you're Darth Snyder. Okay. So there are certain skills that it's okay to talk about, certain skills that are best kept only with you. So that being said, let's jump into the most fundamental aspect of lie detection. What the heck is a lie? Now it seems like a pretty basic question, right? But what is a lie?
Covert attempt at manipulation.
Covert attempt at manipulation. Okay. All right, great. Lily, you had a hand raised.
Purposeful misrepresentation of what a person believes reality to be.
A purposeful misrepresentation. Oh, there went hypnotherapy right out the window. Right? Because that's what we do for a living, isn't it?
Inaccuracies?
Inaccuracies.
Is that a lie or just a mistake?
Oh. You mean there's something else behind this? Can you tell a lie and not know it?
Sure.
All lies fall into one of three categories. The one that most people are concerned with is the one that tends to happen the least, actually. Those are lies of falsification. Somebody's blatantly telling you that the water falling on your feet is not him peeing on your leg, it's raining. Okay? I know I use graphic examples because they stick in your head better. But the truth is, that's what all falsification is telling you something that is directly contra to the truth. Usually also the easiest ones to detect. Now, while I'm on this subject, we need to also divide lies into one of two subcategories within all three of these. I call them hard lies and easy lies. We'll get back to that, but I want to cover the three primary categories so you guys can understand this. Anybody have an idea what the second category of lies might be? Omission. Very much. It's not what you said, it's what you didn't say. The vast majority of the lies that really piss us off tend to be these.
And I imagine some are deliberate and some are unintentional.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's going to be your job. A lot of it, as you're going deeper into the aspects of detecting deceit, is what's the intention behind the action. Okay? Also, you're going to find out that there are certain behaviors that people engage in that will give you a false positive. They will set up all kinds of red flags when in fact the person is being blatantly truthful with you, except their natural physiological response to the situation sends up all kinds of red flags. Now, those of you who are interested in relationship work, and in other words, having a relationship, come on in. You're going to find out. Pick a seat anywhere. It's okay. We won't tell. Okay? You're going to find out really, really quick that this will happen a lot. Okay, I kind of got off track there, but so lies of omission. And then there's the third one. Did you know there was a third one?
Yes. You said there was three.
Good, he's paying attention. This one was the one that really kind of blew me away. This is the one where you really, when first we practiced, what a tangled web we weave when first we practiced to deceive. These are called lies of influence. Okay? Lies of influence are the most challenging to catch because there's a tendency, because of the way they're structured, to create tremendous credibility at the same time. We'll get into some of those. Why don't we get into them now, as a matter of fact, since I'm on that subject. By the way, for those of you who really want to go deep, be prepared to spend a lot of money, but probably one of the best books you can pick up right now is called Spy the Lie. It's relatively new, written by some ex-CIA lie detection experts. I found it to be very well written. It's not real high in terms of jargon. Like when I was studying kinesic interview and interrogation, you had all kinds of weird jargon and things like that. But I think this is very user-friendly. Any books by Paul Ekman, if you're going to deal with emotions or people, worth their weight in gold.
I took a class with him.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Paul Ekman. He was also the primary consultant for the show Lie to Me. Obviously, he didn't see the cancellation coming up.
Who's the author of that book?
This one is by Philip Houston, Michael Floyd, and Susan Carnicero. Now, if you really want to go deep down the lie detection, yes, I have books everywhere, the lie detection rabbit hole, one of the guys that I studied when I was doing kinesic interview and interrogation in college was a guy named Stan B. Walters. And they call him the lie guy. He's probably written and published more information about kinesic interview and interrogation than anybody out there. And I was really jazzed when I actually found a small little home study course of his. But lies of influence are basically deception cues where the person will give you a direct falsification, and then she will deflect you by calling attention to, no, I didn't steal that piece of jewelry. I've been the maintenance man here 25 years. Why would I jeopardize my retirement for that? Right? The other power with lies of influence is the repetition effect.
So you mean it would be like first falsification and then defense?
What they'll do is they'll deflect you. They'll very briefly deny the allegation, usually. Not always. There's about 21 different tactics that people can use in pretty much any combination. We don't have time to cover every single one. I'll try to fly through the laundry list and give you some examples where I can field questions. But the truth of the matter is, this is a very deep subject. And by and large, if you're focusing on the verbal component to catch the lie, you're wading in the deepest waters. There's way too many things that can sidetrack you. Okay? And we'll talk about the order that you should actually be paying attention to in terms of deception behaviors. But lies, even these three categories, are actually, well, they're stress responses. Okay? Fear, anger, sadness, aggression. Okay? Lies, although it seems weird, are not actually natural for us. We have to think about them, which brings us to the concept of hard lies and easy lies. Hard lies have to do with lying on the spot or concealing or misdirecting emotions that are being felt at the moment. Okay? Usually, in terms of a hard lie, you're dealing with emotions on the spot. You're dealing with not having any time to prepare a story. The more time somebody has to prepare a story, the more acting experience they have, the more they move towards this category. Hard lies are usually things that are done face-to-face, in the moment. Those are the ones where you'll see the most deception leakage. Deception leakage are stress responses that happen as a deviation from what we call a baseline. Okay. Starting to sound a little technical, so let me just back up a little bit. Am I losing anybody so far? Was it Eric? when Eric was talking about sensory acuity and calibration skills, right? What does that really mean? Those of you who are not Eric.
Sensory acuity and what?
And calibration skills. What do those really mean?
Eye movements that...
Okay, that's an example of something you might calibrate. But what does it really mean?
Their physical bodily response to the stressful things that you're in mind,
Okay.
which is like sort of a abnormal.
Okay. Rather than go around the entire room, let's just make it real simple. Things you can perceive and what they mean. By the way, when I'm writing on the board, I'm not writing for you, I'm writing for me. This is how I process. Okay?
You can tell because we can't read that.
Yeah, I know. I'm horrible that way. But I did invest in a brand new microphone because I just have to have good sound quality. Things that we can perceive and what they mean. Now, all deception indicators, well, first of all, there's no such thing as a deception indicator. No single characteristic, trait of any kind signals a lie definitively. Things you perceive and what they mean. In other words, you have to be able to calculate change. Change from what? The norm. This is where the rub comes in. Because until you establish what their baseline is, that's the technical term, what their baseline expressiveness is, their baseline stress level is, you can't accurately begin to collect data and figure out what it means. Understand that? Also, you have to remember something else. The person you're interacting with is watching you at the same time you're watching them. Therefore, your responses will affect their responses. Okay? So the first thing we have to do whenever we're going to interact with somebody is we must determine where are they at right now. If we've known this person for a significant amount of time, that's usually pretty easy. Moms do this to their kids all the time because they know when the kid's telling a lie, because you see it every day. Okay? Any deviation from the baseline or the norm is an indicator of stress levels. Period. Deception leakage or deception indicators do not begin to become relevant until they appear in what we call clusters. Okay? A cluster, again, technical term, is any two or more cues appearing within 5 seconds of each other. Okay? Questions on that so far? Okay. So what are some things that we can begin to do what can we start to pay attention to? Well, we can start paying attention to their verbal responses, which is usually the first thing and the primary thing most of us do pay attention to is verbal responses.
You mean the content or the...
Content, usually, specifically.
Are we still on hard lies?
Hard lies are basically what happens when you're trying to mask something you're feeling in the moment or make up a story on the spot. The more you have to improvise with zero preparation time or at higher levels of stress or emotional feelings under the surface, the more harder lying becomes. Because the greater the level of stress, the less control you have over your body. And this is important. Because if you want to get reliable indicators of deception, you have to amplify the stress level. Okay? Which means you may have to be confrontational. If you really want to get people to the point where they're popping. You know what I'm saying? That's why I say this will force you to become really good at your social skills, because this will break every kind of rapport you can possibly imagine. All right? But this is, in kinesic interview and interrogation, that's what we're going to do. There's different types of emotional responses that you have. You have anger, there's depression, denial, acceptance, bargaining. These are all things that the subject is going to engage in based on the current level of stress that they're feeling. Okay? But remember that for most people, just the act of lying, especially if they know they're lying, they have the fear of being caught, they have the stress of trying to come up with the lie and trying to keep their story straight, that's already 3 strikes against them. There will be some deception leakage. Yes?
How are salespeople successful? I mean, how does this play into salespeople?
Well, assuming the salesperson's lying to you.
Right.
But again, I think most salespeople are actually fairly honest. There's bad eggs in every crowd, but the more a person can convince themselves of the truth of something, the more congruent they become. In NLP terms, we're looking for incongruity. We're looking for mismatches between the words coming out of their mouth, their facial expressions, their body language, and their hand language, their legs. In terms of studying body language, we're going to look at the face. We're going to look at the arms and shoulders. Torso, a little bit. But legs, nobody pays attention to legs. Legs will tell you a lot. When we're dealing with people, most liars spend most of their time on their facial expressions and and the words coming out of their mouths. Some pay more attention to their tonality, but depending on the stress levels, it'll still slip. That make sense?
Higher pitch, I bet, is more lying.
Higher, no.
No?
Higher pitch means more stress.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Big
I see where you're
distinction.
going, yeah.
Which brings us to 2 fallacies that could in fact trip you up. They can be reliable indicators that some deception is going on. It can also just mean they're stressed out for some other reason. One is called the Brokaw effect, named after the TV anchor Tom Brokaw. When asked about, when Paul Ekman was doing an interview with him about how he figures out if somebody's lying, he said one of the first things I look for is when I ask him a question, is their level of response go from very simple, very direct, to very long, complex explanations. I call it a tirade. Sometimes there's emotion with that. Sometimes it's just all of a sudden the explanation gets way detailed, way out of proportion. Now, the problem with this is that Brokaw would take that as an indicator of lying. It's not. It's an indicator of stress, okay, of defensiveness, not necessarily lying. It could be. Doesn't mean it is. The other effect is called the Othello effect. Again, a behavior that could be masked, can be perceived as being deceitful when in fact it's only a stress response. In the Othello effect, just like in the show, or the play, somebody's confronted with something that stresses them out, and all of a sudden, because they're being confronted, because they're having an intense emotional experience, they start to have stress indicators emerge. The person on the other end perceives that as validation that their accusation was in fact true when it wasn't. It was only a stress response. And so you've convicted the person and they're not guilty. Okay? Mm-hmm. It's an exaggerated stress response. It's like the lady doth protest too much, methinks, kind of a thing. And there's actually different layers to that. When we get back to lies of influence, we'll talk about some examples you might hear. But again, just remember, these will in fact happen. As you're confronting people, as you're questioning people, as they feel more and more interrogated, for lack of a better word, their stress levels will begin to increase. Okay? But these are only single indicators. Nothing begins to mean anything until they start happening in 2s and 3s and 4s. And again, you have a 5-second window when you're doing this. Okay? Now, one of my favorite body language indicators, if you're going to start doing deception, aside from getting a baseline, is pupil dilation. Now, pupil dilation in and of itself does not indicate deception. Okay? indicates towards and away, what I call towards and away from, positive stress or negative stress. When the pupils dilate, it's generally a positive response or extreme fear. So when I teach my guys and ladies about attraction and relationships, I tell them unless they're shaking in their shoes and leaving a little puddle under the bench, if the eyes are dilated and she's not running in terror or he's not running in terror, they're into you. Okay? When we see something we like, whether it's something on a piece of paper or something in a store window or another human being, the pupils dilate. Okay? When we have extreme fear, the pupils also dilate because we need to see how the hell to get out of there. Okay? So, if you're in I hope you guys are never in a situation where you have to put somebody through the kind of stress that a lot of these interviewers use. Okay? But if you see those pupils dilate, why are they having that extreme fear? If you're not standing over them with an M60 or a butcher knife, there's probably something they're afraid you're going to find out. I mean, you should dig deeper, not necessarily assume right away that they're lying. Okay? Think of everything you're doing as a quest for confirmation rather than judgment. Okay? So, pupil dilation is one of the things I like to look at. I call it pupil dance because as you interact with a human being, as they're listening to what you say, as the interaction progresses, the more they like you, the more the pupils will begin to grow. As they move away or have a aversive response to what you're saying, you'll see pupils dilate. When people are analyzing and mismatching what you're saying, trying to find holes in your argument, you'll see the pupils dilate. Okay? If the eyes stop moving, they're inside their own head talking to themselves. As a rule, yes.
So can we say that like the pupils dilated would have to do with stress?
Everything we're talking about is about stress. You either have positive stress or negative stress.
When they grow, that would be like a sign of relaxation or comfort.
It could be relaxation, but it could also be arousal, physical, sexual arousal. Pupils get huge in cases of intense emotion, intense positive emotions. In fact, they get so huge that the irises disappear, actually. Okay, but this is a very useful indicator. Okay, but it only becomes useful if you determine what's the norm first. I do this to my wife all the time. I used to drive her insane. Because socially, we're taught not to hurt people's feelings. And that's the key. Just because you perceive a mistruth or a lie of omission or even a lie of influence, it may not be appropriate to call attention to it at that moment. Right? You know the old expression, give somebody enough rope, they'll hang themselves. Right? Okay. While it's fun to go out and throw your Jedi lightning bolts around, zapping people in with truth serum every time, it's usually not socially advantageous for you to do that. Okay? So we talked about verbals. What are verbals? Verbals are any words that come out of their mouth. I would like to talk about these last because they are easily the most convoluted. But some of the things that are nonverbal, which is basically anything coming out of their mouth that has nothing to do with the word itself or the meaning of the word itself, those begin to become useful. One of the things we want to look for is the use of non-words, stutters, pauses. Again, only useful if you've already calibrated what their normal way of speaking and communicating is. You ask somebody, did you take the last cookie out of my jar? And they go, no. How many cues did I just give you? 2. At least 2, right? I gave you 4 or 5 actually, because my eyes went up, I paused, I used a non-word, and then if you listen to my tonality, it went up, didn't it? Nope. Okay. That's how fast 5 cues can appear. Simple. Now imagine when you're having a conversation with somebody, and it's something you're really passionate about, you're really inspired about. Imagine how challenging these things can be. Okay. So pick one or two areas of the body that you want to begin to work with and become really good at those. And then when those are kind of on autopilot, where you can be pretty reliable with those, then start adding other stuff in. Because after a while, things will just kind of happen in gestalts. They'll just start jumping out at you. But the most reliable and useful, non-manipulatable by most people indicator of neurological arousal is pupil dilation. Yes, yes, Lee.
Are you going to get into pathological liars?
Pathological liars are kind of outside of the purview of this because most of them don't have any idea what reality is and they don't care. And they're not going to exhibit a lot of these stress responses unless you sit them down in the chair and then you start calling them on it.
Which I
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
which I did at one time.
Exactly. They're professional liars. Con men, professional liars, people who are used to prevaricating or prefabricating for a living. Con men, enemy soldiers, spies, huh? Boyfriends? Yeah. You might have to change your calibration skills on the boyfriend. Okay.
Control his pupils? Can they control
No.
their pupils?
As a rule, no. No. But you have to get a baseline first. Most people don't have the level of physiological control to influence their pupil dilation unless they have a strong background in method acting.
Or they're just totally into their story and they're like
Again,
believing it while they're...
Whatever the level of physiological arousal they're experiencing, the emotions they're feeling will impact their level of expressiveness, verbally and non-verbally. That's why when Ekman was doing most of his research on facial expressions, when he wasn't using, people in a natural setting, he was using actors trained in method. Because the whole process behind method is about accessing legitimate emotional states from your past and then amplifying them and using that as your mode of expression, which makes your behaviors, verbally and non-verbally, authentic and congruent. Okay? It's important to understand. The more somebody can get into character, the more they can begin to become convinced and believe what they're saying, the more convincing the lie. The closer to the actual truth the lie is, the more even harder to detect. That's the most powerful lie, the one that's closest to the truth. It's just 1 or 2 degrees off. Okay? So you have to be really, really aware of all of the... I'm not trying to overwhelm you or dissuade you from going down this path, but I want you to understand, let's try and, if we're not aware of it, it's going to screw us up at some point in the process. Does that make sense? Okay. So, non-words, right? Stutters, slips of the tongue. Freudian slips, they like to call them. These all represent stress indicators. When they start to appear, in clusters, now the flag should start going up. And the cluster has to appear consistently. That means every time something is initiated that would provoke a stress response, you get a similar repetition of behavior. The more repetition of behavior you get, the more reliable the indicator becomes. That make sense? Okay. Next thing we look at, by the way, this is not exhaustive, but if I give you more than this, you're not going to get any of them. But these are the ones you're most commonly going to see. Questions on this so far?
I forgot, what did you say, the Othello effect?
The Othello principle is where you accuse somebody of something, or you question them. You're trying to you basically accuse them of lying, and their stress response is so exaggerated that it gives them the appearance of lying when they're actually just trying to defend themselves. Okay, all of a sudden deception. Stress indicators are misperceived as deception leakage or deception indicators. Okay, yes?
I have a question. When you are dealing with this stuff face to face with people, how do you got any tips on how to control your own state? Because it's usually high stress on both ends. And I find myself I'll find myself just tensing up, or I do certain things, or I just get quiet, and I would like to be more, I guess you'd say, in control of my own responses in these kind of situations.
You can't do lie detection if you're not in control of yourself. There's too much nonverbal information going back and forth between the two systems.
You know, that just reminded me, many years ago, I had a guy call me up. He said he had to take a lie detector test, and he wanted to know with hypnosis, could I help him to fool the lie detector test? Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't take
and you
the
can,
time.
actually. But,
Yeah. I understand that just shaking your leg could be enough.
Yes, it's huge. You have to remember something. Attraction is a stress response. Every indicator that guys and girls look for on each other to find out if they're into you or not are stress responses. They're just generated from a positive state. Okay? Everything human beings, every form of body language is in response to some level or some change in their stress level, positive or negative. She's got this permanent... You have a question. What is it?
No, it makes it hard to, if you're in a situation like that where you're not expecting someone to be lying, there's no competition, and each physical thing that you see looks like a stress response, then how do you then not interpret that as lies, and instead it's just a positive stress response?
Okay. Context, for one. Context is king. You cannot divorce the responses from the context. Period. I wish we could take these things out in isolation, say, okay, this is this and this. No. It's all based on the situation you're in at the time. If you're having a heated argument and all of a sudden he gets big, his eyes get really, these pupils get really big and wide, well, he's either about to kill you out of fear or make love to you. It's just, but what's the context? The context is going to give you a frame to put around it, but you have to be careful. Okay? Again, we have to use some level of judgment. Getting back to his question, did I answer your question, by the way? I don't know if it's direct enough.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely. I understand that on context.
Definitely.
No, I understand that on context.
Yeah, you have to look at the context. So that's why I'm a little bit in a challenging situation here, because most of this is based on a very confrontational, we're in an interrogation room or some kind of a negotiation and the stakes are high. Most of us are not going to deal with that level of stress. So how do we make this more pedestrian or civilian, for lack of a better word? But did that help you with legs?
Yes.
Okay. Also, keep an eye out on, I covered this in the attraction seminar. Keep an eye on where the feet are pointing. You'll see this, especially if you're somebody who's in a hot seat. Like his boss is right here, and the door's over there, and they're trying to get their feet pointing towards the door as quick as possible. Okay? You'll see this a lot in the bars and stuff like that. You'll see a guy trying his damnedest to talk to a girl, and he's full frontal, and she's like, and she's trying to be polite, and 90% of her is out the door. These things will happen in situations where you're confronting people as well. One of the biggest indicators that I use, and it's not a deception, it's not an indicator of deception, although it could be, are body tilts or postural tilts. If somebody likes what they're seeing or likes what you're saying, you'll see a subtle forward lean. If you look at me from the side, if this is neutral, you'll see this subtle forward lean. If they don't like it, if they're trying to retreat from what's being said, you'll see this. Okay? And you can watch this happen as people are involved in conversations, and the conversation starts to go south. You'll see people start to back up. You'll see people start to get distance from the thing that's causing the stress. These indicators that we're talking about are ways that we try to deal with our own level of internal stress and the stress on the outside. That's why having control of the stress levels in the room or in the interaction are so important. The more wood you can throw on the fire, the harder your body becomes to control. The more you give them the ability to be in control, the less reliable the deception indicators become, because they become smaller. So your job, if you want to get people, flagging themselves, jump their stress level.
Can you comment on a therapeutic situation, how I might use that?
Stems. Stems. Stems technique. Well, that leads us to something called micro-expressions. Which actually, that's facial stuff, so maybe we'll just go into that right away. You have certain types of body language. Ekman's identified it, and so I'll use his terminologies. We have what we call emblems. You have illustrators. Micro-expressions. He calls them squelched expressions. Now, in terms of therapy, as you continue to talk about their problem, pay attention to what they do with their hands, what they do with their feet, how their body contorts or doesn't contort. These are all indicators of ever-increasing levels of stress. When I do a very unique form of hypnotherapy called abreactive hypnotherapy, which means, in a nutshell, if somebody comes to me because they have chronic asthma, I'm going to induce the asthma attack in order to fix it. So I'm real good at giving people stress. Okay? But the stress that you initiate, or the stress response that you amplify, is a direct connection to where the problem is at the unconscious or neurological level. So it becomes clinically useful that way. The more somebody tries to hide or deny it, the more their stress level is going to jump, especially if you continue to ask those pain points. That's when you start calibrating on their tonality, the words they lean on, things like that. Because as you use them, every time you use a word that has an emotional charge to it within their system, they're going to have an amplified stress response, either positive or negative. That's why whenever possible, use their words. Okay? Or deliberately misuse their words if you want to get more stress. Again, this becomes an art as well. So, emblems. Emblems are the unique socially programmed lexicon of gestures that we use. Now, how do we use them in terms of lie detection or in terms of subconscious emotional response? Paul Ekman was talking about one of the first experiments he did on emblems. Now, by the way, emblems are things like this. Okay. Your driving finger, you know. Right? Now, an emblem becomes an emblem when it's delivered partially and outside of the field of presentation. The field of presentation is here to here, usually actually between the neck and the hips. So he actually hired one of his co-professors at the college or university where he was undergraduating or graduating, I don't know, to grill these prospective psychology students on their career paths, where they wanted to go. And whenever they answered, they couldn't answer it right. So he would basically start, say, so where do you want to major in when you graduate college? I want to go into research. Oh, you don't care about the people who really need the help. You want to hide in the laboratory and just crunch numbers, things like that. You do it for 3 or 5 minutes. And he would videotape all the interactions. Well, he got this one girl in there, and he was watching it, and he saw the most amazing thing. The girl, for almost after the first minute to 2 minutes, was giving the professor the bird through the entire interview. Just like I'm giving it to you. It's delivered outside the field of presentation. It's never orthodox. Okay? But these are things you will, in fact, begin to pick up. Okay? Okay? Very cool. So there's according to Ekman, there's about 60, in the American lexicon of emblems, there's about 60 different gestures that we use. An emblem becomes important as an unconscious response when it's delivered outside of the field of presentation. Many times the person doing it doesn't even know they're doing it. Okay? Again, add that to your list of possible clusters. If all of a sudden you're talking to somebody, their voice level rises, they shift back, and they cross their arms, and you see a little finger peeking out at you. Now you have a flag, right? We can have fun, but these are things that people do. Right? One of my favorites is the incongruent nods. At the beginning of almost every session I teach, I go, several rules. This means yes. This means no. This means, oh shit, please don't call on me. Right? Someday they'll laugh at that. I don't know. Or I say, this means yes. This means no. There will be a test. Okay? And you'll find, more often than not, that people are true to that. However, many times the words coming out of their mouth will not match the nodding. It's like, I really love Chinese food, and I can eat it every day. You know, I can't lie to them.
Well, I take issue with one of those.
I know you always do.
Okay, so, and in fact, I think it happened a few minutes ago, when you asked her something, I forgot what it was, and she said like this, and you imitated that.
Mm-hmm.
I have perceived when they're going like this, when they're meaning yes, it's like, you won't even believe how much I mean that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's
still a negation going on. It's just not necessarily the topic you're thinking of. And I discovered that too. Also, one of the things that happen is many times, especially when we get onto the subject of micro-expressions, micro-expressions indicate one of two things or both. A, suppressed emotion or repressed emotion. And if it's repressed, they don't know it. We'll talk about that in a minute. But yes, in some cases, not enough to be statistically useful, they will be disagreeing with something in what you're saying. There will be some level of moving away from or aversive response to it. When you get inconsistencies like that, that's where it becomes a point of exploration.
Actually experiencing some high emotion?
Almost always. Almost always. Yes?
Does that mean like jaw clenching?
Jaw clenching can be a very strong sign of, well, it is a tension sign, but what does it occur in conjunction with that makes it relevantly useful?
What is it, a micro?
As a rule, just the jaw expression? No. But it is a tension response. A micro-expression is a full expression that takes place within about a fifth of a second, or 15th of a second. Okay. Contrast that with squelched expressions. Squelched expressions are emotions that we're feeling in the moment, we sense it's coming, and we chop it off in mid-stride. Okay? A micro-expression is a complete expression of one of the primal emotions: anger, fear, sadness, surprise, contempt, and joy. Okay? Those are the primary emotions that all human beings experience cross-culturally, cross-racially. Okay. Mm-hmm. It could be, as they're talking about something terrible, a smile flashes across their face for a fraction of a second, all the while they're espousing how sorry they are for this person, and inside they're rejoicing. Okay. We've all seen squelched expressions where something bad happens to somebody and it's obviously hysterical to you, and you're trying to be politically correct. Right? Right? Or, somebody broke wind and it was you and you don't want anybody. I see we've had a few. There's a contest. I pay money. So micro-expressions are very useful. Most people cannot see them, but with just an hour or two of training, with several hundred photos, you can begin to actually pick them up pretty consistently. Okay. Paul Ekman, if you go to his site, pauleckman.com, I think he actually has, you can actually join his membership site and actually get access to his facial training software, which I think is very much worthwhile if you're going to be dealing with people ever. Okay. Illustrators. Illustrators are cool. Now, the thing about emblems, illustrators, microexpressions, and squelched expressions is, in fact, the frequency will change as the stress level changes. As a rule, as the stress level increases, emblems will tend to become more dominant, especially if they're moving towards deception, okay, or higher levels of stress. Emblems will become more blatant. They'll become more frequent. Contrast that with illustrators. Illustrators are meaningless movements that actually add emphasis to the words being spoken. So if you're Italian, you're going to do this a lot, right? However, as a person stress level goes up, and they move towards deception, illustrators tend to decrease. Now, how do you know if an illustrator is increasing or decreasing?
Baseline.
You've got to have a baseline. None of this will help you a bit if you don't have something to compare it against. That make sense? Is this helpful? Useful?
Yeah.
Okay. But anytime you see somebody talking and they're gesturing wildly, on a kinesic deception or stress calibration level, they have, and they're only useful in relation to the speed and the way the person's expressing themselves verbally. However, neuro-linguistically, they have a meaning to the nervous system that is useful. Okay, they actually do, in fact, indicate how somebody is creating the structure of that experience in their own mind. Which means if we understand it, we can use it. But that's a different class. Oh, such a T. So, emblems are what? What are emblems? The finger. They're going to remember the finger forever. But they're any culturally programmed gesture. Remember, this means something completely different in Europe and Asia than it does here. Okay? They're cultural. Ekman did a lot of work on delineating between what is a culturally programmed nonverbal response versus what is a culturally programmed one. My suggestion is you learn the universal human expressions first and master those, because everything else is going to be a variation, and it's going to be culturally dependent. Okay? So that's my recommendation. Take it or leave it. Let's take a 5-minute break, come back, and we'll go somewhere else. All right. So, we've talked about verbal indicators. We've talked about nonverbals, right? A couple other things I want to mention about verbal or nonverbal stress indicators. As a rule, pitch and tempo are highly responsive to increasing levels of stress. They're probably some of the easiest things to calibrate. So, but in order to calibrate, you have to have what? The baseline. Okay? So when you talk to somebody, you have to calibrate what their current level of expression is, and then calibrate deviance, change. People who are stressed tend to raise the pitch of their voice. They get much higher like this. What? Right? A state that you're not happy with to being free of it. Suffering is what happens when you run away from the problem and it keeps following you wherever you go. Most people will not show up at a hypnotherapist's doorstep until they've suffered enough. Okay? By the time they reach most of our offices, they've been to the medical doctor, the psychologist, the psychic, the witch doctor, the shaman, the voodoo guy down the street. Usually they show up on us because they can't find witch doctor or voodoo doctor in the phone book, so they just show up. And we fix them more often than not, provided we get the right information and we have the right set of techniques. But as a rule, hypnotherapy has a better hit rate than most other forms of psycho-emotional intervention, by far. So, be that as it may. That's my sales pitch for us. But anyway, that's lies of omission. You want to neutralize the distractors or the deflectors, lies of influence. That's what we just covered, and the strategy for dealing with it. Because I couldn't give you this big three-headed monster without giving you some way to start to deal with it. Okay. As a rule, you'll almost never go wrong with finding something within what anybody's saying that you can agree with. Sometimes you'll have to chunk up. Sometimes you'll have to chunk down. But the moment they perceive some level of agreement, it takes a lot of the power out of their willingness to fight. It takes a lot of the fight out of them. Okay? Not sure exactly why. It could be any number of reasons. But as a rule, that's how it works. Yes.
Can you repeat that? What you just said about what takes the power out of the...
Finding anything within the crux of their argument that you can agree with. If someone says, I really hate Chinese food. I don't like to eat at places like that. God knows what's in it. blah, blah, blah. Right? You say, you know what? I completely agree that sometimes you just don't know what's in Chinese food.
So like just kind of, you know, like an agreement kind of neutralizes.
Now, did I in any way say I don't like Chinese food either? Did I in any way imply that we're not going to the Chinese restaurant? Right? But it took the sting out of it. Oh, I've got an ally. The guard goes down, and all of a sudden the controls are let up, and things start to slip. Because that's all a deception indicator is. It's a momentary, the guard goes down for a brief moment in time. It's there. Yes.
But it also helps in humans.
It can. Absolutely.
As you go up to, like, if everything happens for a reason, if they're agreeing to something on a higher level, then you start to get back on track on the feeling.
Yeah. And that's a very common interrogation tactic is to, you know what, I can completely understand why you would want that guy up. He called you a name, he spit on you in front of your woman. I can understand why you'd want to shove a knife through his gut. I do the same thing. Yeah, that motherfucker really had it coming. Quit. Because the law don't care. The law is you either did it or you didn't do it. Right? That's, again, way around it. Yes.
Okay, so let me ask you this. My son-in-law, my husband confronted my son-in-law, there's always dishes there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my son-in-law usually answers this sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
I just finished with it. We did clean it up. You know, he goes on tangents like that.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't that kind of like what you're saying is rationalizing it away?
Well, what was the actual task he was supposed to do?
Clean the dishes.
Did he do it?
No.
Then obviously it's a lie of falsification. He didn't do it. Okay, but then he's going on to what the dishes suddenly appeared magically dirty again. You have gremlins that like to eat when nobody's looking. Tell me exactly how that happened. You know, and again, just tell me what happened, and they'll hang themselves. But that's more of a lie of falsification. I mean, obviously, if the proof is right there, it's easily verifiable. You're not really dealing so much with a lie of influence so much as just blatant falsification. They're still going to try and rationalize and qualify.
I just finished using it. I just finished using it.
You just finished using the dish that you didn't clean.
Exactly. So therefore, that's why it's in there.
Okay, well then clean it.
Do you think he knows how much he's BSing us?
I don't think he knows how much you know he's BSing.
Oh, okay.
Because we all think our parents are stupid. Yeah. Okay. Especially as we become teenagers. And we should all move out while we still know everything.
I have to tell you the funniest comment about that. My daughter, when she always manipulated me. I could tell from the time she was born. So when she got older, I said, I'm not going to let you manipulate me anymore. She said, you knew?
And then if you made your next request and you did it. Remember, a lot of times the resistance that we mount is episodic. The minute we change direction, the state goes away. And so all the energy we built up to fight the good fight isn't there anymore. We have to generate it all over again. So a lot of these tactics, if we ever get to them, are built around those kinds of tactics. But I really wanted to cover that particular one. The next one that we're going to talk about is qualifiers. Now, qualifiers come in two flavors. Nobody here does sales, so talking about qualifying a client or qualifying a prospect doesn't make a lot of sense for some people. The qualifier is a condition that gives somebody license to omit certain kinds of information or focus on certain kinds of information. So you have qualifiers of exclusion and qualifiers of perception. Words in this category would be like basically, fundamentally, probably, most often, for the most part, usually, possibly. They give you more wiggle room in your answer. They remove the definiteness of it. Yeah. So it allows you to truthfully withhold certain information. Well, basically, he asked me to keep a separate set of books, basically just for himself. What the hell does basically actually mean? You either did it. It's like being a little pregnant. It's like, the other set of qualifiers are qualifiers of perception, and these are very similar to what we do in lies of influence, in that they are building our credibility. People start talking about how trustworthy they are, how upfront they are, how honest they are. They'll say things like, to be perfectly honest. These are pre-frames. The simple fact is, truthfully, if you really got to know, anytime you hear a qualifier or something like that, they're trying to amplify their credibility and your perception of them as being honest and upright. Whereas in this one, they're going to exclude some kind of information. They're looking for permission to get vague. Does that make sense? Frankly, sounds very specific, but it's not. Trust me, I teach this shit. Okay? Frankly is one of those words that you think you know what it means. And so you fill in your own definition of what frankly means and apply it to the person speaking to you. Okay? I teach the opposite side of this too. Okay? Creates very powerful hypnotic suggestions. You'll find, interestingly, that a lot of these exclusion modifiers and a lot of these things end in an ly, which implies they are descriptions or descriptors of something, either describe nouns or adjectives. You use enough of them, people go into trance really fast. The next one is, everybody loves this one, selective memory. Okay. And again, when we're dealing with selective memory, they're looking for, it's very hard to challenge. Did you in fact take the last donut? I can't recall. Did you pinch your ass? I don't remember that exactly. Right? Did you in fact sleep with my sister? I don't think so. Weren't you paying attention? What? Sounds silly, but these are the things you'll see this all the time. Did you, on the night of July 12th, were you in fact at this location? I don't rightly remember. Right? Were you or were you not on Friday night bowling with your friends? It was so long ago, I don't know. I don't remember. It's very hard to challenge it. Yeah.
The difference between saying, I don't recall, and I don't remember, because I was deposed as a notary recently, and an attorney briefed me a little. He said, say, I don't recall, and I don't remember.
I don't know the difference. If there is one, semantically, I don't know if there would be one. To me, they're pretty synonymous. But as a rule, here's the thing you got to understand. These behaviors don't tell you anything unless and cluster. People will respond this way and be truthful. Just because you hear it does not mean they're lying yet. You have to look at everything. When you ask them, did you in fact see my sister and have dinner and go into her apartment at 10 o'clock at night last month while I was out of town? I don't remember. Count them. How could you even accuse me of something like that? I don't even recall if that were true or not. Jumping out at you now? Okay? You have to take in everything. The context. And especially the 5-second rule. Remember, if you ask the question and you see this look, start counting. Okay? First of all, pause is a big warning sign anyway. Okay? That's usually you see it, then just wait, because you've already got one. 2, you know you're on the right track. Yeah.
I think you tell a lie by telling the truth.
How can you tell a lie by telling the truth? You spin it. You use certain words that people have preconceived associations for that have nothing to do with what you're actually saying. They fill in their own details, you've told the truth, but they've implied a different meaning to it. Oh shit, that came out of me? Some people call it spinning. Those fall under the classification of lies of omission, more so, and lies of influence as well. Memory. Is this useful? Cool stuff? You guys can give me a good review, right? Would you guys like, if I were to do like a 2 or 3 day workshop on this stuff, would it something you guys would like to do? Would that be something? This means yes.
We're covering different subjects, you know, like that have to do with like the nervous system and like basic human behavior stuff.
This is the first time I've ever openly taught the skill of lie detection.
Okay.
I've taught some of it, pieces of it, to my mastermind members, but I'm going much more in depth in certain areas.
I have a question about like if somebody's in, how you said like have you ever been in a place where you wanted to believe somebody or you believe? What do you do when you're dealing with people who, you know, like just reality avoidance in general, like not wanting to see like the reality of stuff? Like if you're dealing with somebody and you're, you know, like financially connected or whatever, and what they do affects you, and they're not completely looking at reality, what do you do about that? You know, like
I went into trance during the explanation of your question, so I'm not sure what the question actually was.
What do you do when you're dealing with people who are like deeply in denial or